well, this is the most fun panel for me because I get to be with my writers. Why don't we start off and just go down the line, and if you could, introduce yourself and then, tell us what your most recent book is and maybe an elevator pitch for it. Marcy, kick it off.
Here I go with the bad microphone. Hi, my name's Marcy Dermansky, and Jenny Jackson is my editor. My novel is called Hot Air, and the novel opens when a single mother is having a date with a single father in a backyard after the pandemic, and a hot air balloon crashes into the swimming pool. And without thinking, she jumps in and she rescues the people in the hot air balloon, and one of them turns out to be a billionaire who also was the first boy that she ever kissed at summer camp. Yeah, and so it just starts off a chain of comedy of events, and it's a social satire, and it deals a lot with class and longing and what one will do for a swimming pool. Okay. Yeah, or hot air. Yeah.
All right, Marie.
Okay.
So I'm Marie Rutkoski. I'm a professor of English literature as well as a writer, and I wrote a lot of books for children, young adults before turning to adult readers. Ordinary Love is about a woman named Emily who, when she was a teenager, fell in love with her best friend, another girl, and it was this true first love, and it ends in heartbreak. She goes on to marry a man who seems perfect. He's wealthy, he's handsome, he adores her. But over the course of their marriage, she learns that he's actually pretty controlling and manipulative. And just as the book begins when she's just getting out of that marriage and she runs into her ex at a party. And in the intervening years, Jen, her ex-girlfriend, has become a famous Olympic track athlete who has a ton of sponsors, is sometimes a model. And the question of the novel is whether they can make it work. So it's a second chance romance. It's a queer literary love story. And I'm proud of the book.
I'm Adam Roberts. I have been a food writer for 20 years, and I had the experience of ghostwriting a celebrity's cookbook, which gave me the idea for a novel called Food Person, and that's what my novel is, and it's about an aspiring food writer in her 20s who's socially awkward and uncomfortable in her own skin, but she's passionate about food, and she gets an opportunity to ghostwrite a cookbook for a celebrity who does not care at all about food or cooking. And so the book is not really based on my experience because I had a very nice celebrity. In the novel, the celebrity is a bit of a hot mess, so it's a lot of fun.
So as I was thinking about what makes these books sort of a piece or similar, I realized that every single one of these books has a protagonist who is at an inflection point in their life. The books all open with an existential crisis for your main characters. So I'm not sure if you've particularly thought of your book through that lens, but maybe you could tell me a little bit about what your main character's crisis over the course of this book is.
Yeah. And so when this book, I said that started with a single mother on a date, it's actually her first date in over 7 years when the book starts. And so I think it's always a really important thing when you start a book, where you start it. And I deeply believe that you want something to happen right away. So I think having a hot air balloon crash through your first date is pretty big. I don't know. I don't think it's a religious sign, but I think it just means that something is supposed to happen. And suddenly she goes from perhaps having one man being interested in her into both people who are in the hot air balloon, the husband and the wife. And so I think it's just like a great starting point.
And the pandemic has made her question her life choices, right? She's not feeling like thrilled about her particular position, right?
Yeah, definitely. And that's also it was a lonely period, and I think it was a strange time coming out of it. And so I think she's ready to start life again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Marie, what would you say is Emily's crisis as the novel opens? Because it does it opens with also a swimming pool moment.
Yeah.
Wow.
Hot air balloon, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It does open with an incident with a swimming pool where Emily's husband throws their son into the swimming pool as a punishment. So I guess something that I've thought a lot about regarding this book is this idea that we talk about coming of age as if it's something that happens only when you're young and you become an adult, like when you shift from being a teenager to being a young adult. And, I thought about that kind of coming of age for a long time as a YA writer. And when I was writing the sections of the book that are set when Emily's a teenager, it felt really familiar. I thought like, oh, I know this period of coming of age. But as I wrote the book more, I just realized that everybody has different moments of coming of age, no matter what age they are, that we're constantly, not constantly, but I think every so often we reach a point in our lives where we think, I don't really know who I am. I don't know if I am where I wanted to be when I was younger, and we feel ourselves shifting into something new. So I think Emily is at a crisis point, but also at a point of becoming more fully herself.
Yeah.
And maybe those things often happen at the same time.
Yours does not have a swimming pool, but we will forgive you for that lapse.
Next one, I'll do a swimming pool. No, my novel begins with Isabella. My main character is working at a digital food magazine, sort of like Food 52 or Serious Eats. I don't know if any of you read those websites. And so she's sort of invisible there, and she brings cookies to work every day as a way to sort of avoid socially interacting with people. She just hands out cookies and then goes to her desk and does her work. But the crisis begins when, on this day that the novel begins, she decides to bring one to her boss, who's a little bit like Miranda Priestley in The Devil Wears Prada, a little scary. And the boss taps her to do a cooking demonstration on camera, which Isabella is not prepared to do at all. She does not want to be on camera. And basically, without spoiling the opening, she basically freezes up on camera and has a disaster. She's supposed to make a chocolate souffle. She drops the bowl. She breaks glass, and she freezes it. And actually, I don't know if I ever told you this, but when I was in my 20s, I got discovered by the Food Network.
Oh.
And they had me come in and do an audition where they had me do in front of a whole crew of people, like cameramen and lighting people, do a demonstration where I was cooking a swordfish, and I froze. Like, I was just so scared. And so I guess it's semi-autobiographical, too, that crisis at the beginning of the book, yeah.
Now, would you classify your books as having villains, or do you think your characters are their own worst enemies? And I'm going to start with Adam and work back this way. Do you think is there a villain? Is Molly a villain?
Well, it's funny. I think on the first draft, sure, Molly was a villain, but I think that was a flaw in the book that I wanted to make Molly. I mean, on the surface level, when you're writing a celebrity who's writing a cookbook and she doesn't really eat and she's just doing it to stay famous, it's really easy to be facile and really surface level with it. So my goal in the revision was to really deepen her character and to really figure out, like, why is she like this, and what is her history, and why does she behave this way? And so I don't think of her as a villain. I do think of her as an antagonist for Isabella to overcome, or that spurs Isabella along in her journey. But in terms of being a villain, I don't think so. No.
Yeah, actually, I think that you just rewrote the question and made it a better question. So let's change that. Marie, does your book have a specific antagonist, or is the character her own antagonist?
I mean, in some ways, the character is her own antagonist because she's allowed other people's expectations of her to get in the way of what she wants. She's allowed her own self-doubt to get in the way of what she wants to. But she definitely has an antagonist. I mean, her husband, I don't think of him as a villain. And something that's been kind of interesting about writing this book is that I've discovered some things about it just from getting feedback that I didn't really know. Like, I hadn't really thought about the plot line with Emily and her husband as such a major part of the story. Maybe that sounds naive to say. I think of it mostly as a story about coming into your own and about falling in love and then falling in love again. But Jack, he does some things that are villainous, but I tried to write him as an antagonist who is sympathetic in some ways. Like, I think, at least I understand why he acts the way that he does, even if the way he acts is reprehensible.
Who are your villains?
Well, So here's the funny thing. I would call my villains in some sense would be my protagonists.
Yeah.
And at the same point, this is something I've encountered in so many of my novels where so many people read them and they love them, but they say that they don't like any of the characters. And I mean, if you want to go on Goodreads for almost all of so many of my books, and it floors me because I actually tend to like love all of them, even like the most flawed of them all. And I think when I like to write, what I love to do is I love to write the interior monologues, and I feel like people are always thinking things that they shouldn't say constantly.
Yeah.
And I'm always thinking, and so in a novel, we get to hear the thoughts, and all the characters are always thinking exactly what they think, but they don't even say them in books, but people hate them, and they're real, and they're flawed, and I love them. Like the main character in Hot Air is a single mother, and she's kind of like, how do I get my next free dinner? And I don't find that there's anything wrong with that, but so it's a funny thing, but in that sense, I don't have villains. In Hot Air, there is a billionaire couple, and they have these great intentions. They meet a single mother. They're like, we love her and we love her daughter and we're going to adopt them like pets, and they believe it. They really believe it. And so when it doesn't work out for them, they change plans, but they don't intend to be evil. And I don't know if you don't intend to be evil and you are evil. What do you think?
Well, I sort of think Marcy's book does a magic trick because you have this main character that you root for, Joni. She is a single mom. She loves her daughter so much. The book is very much a skewering of the billionaire class and the ultra rich. And yet the main character, Joni, is by no means pushing away the billionaire. She's like, hey, that looks pretty good.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't mind a piece of that.
Right.
Is that something you think about when you're writing, how to walk the line of skewering a lifestyle while letting us root for a character who would be pretty darn happy to have that lifestyle?
No, because I think a lot of writings, if I were to think too hard about it, I would just choke and I wouldn't be able to do it. And what I love about having an editor and what I love about having readers is sometimes people will point out and they'll say, oh, this is what you did. And I'll say, yes, I meant that exactly. But I don't really know. It just kind of works its way out on the page. So I never tried to balance a line
Adam, over to you. So Isabella is sort of hapless, right? Like she's really kind of leading her life in a disastrous fashion. But she's ultimately really lovable. Why did you feel like she was but the point of your book is really to experience the food world. So why was Isabella the right character to bring us into the food world?
Well, Isabella, first of all, I mean, it's so funny. When I wrote this book, I let my partner, Craig, read it first. He was my first reader. And when I was done, I said, aren't you proud of me? Like, I created this character, Isabella, from whole cloth, like, just pulled her from the air. And she's so original. Like, what do you think? And he's like, you basically wrote yourself. Like, and I think, in a weird way, like I think I was skewering myself because Isabella is so passionate about food and so snobby in a weird way. She only wants to use the best olive oil. She only wants to go to the farmer's market and get the best ingredients. And for her to encounter this character, Molly, who doesn't care about any of this, it sort of forces her to question how devoted she is to this cause of being a foodie, quote unquote foodie. So I think Isabella is our way into this world because as much as people like Alice Waters or these food people hold up these values as being this is the best way to live your life, she's living her life that way and her life is not that great. So it's sort of opening a window onto that culture of being an obsessed foodie. So I was sort of skewering myself in a way too.
Oh, I love that. I mean, I think all the best characters have bits of the author in them, and but we contain multitudes, and so you can't always recognize that. Marie, would you say that Emily is a character that we're meant to fully empathize with, or do you feel like she's a character who we see making mistakes and feel frustrated with? And how did you sort of navigate the reader's feelings towards your main character?
I think probably, yes, readers will feel frustrated with her, but I don't think that precludes empathy. I think that, at least as a reader, when I see characters making mistakes, I do feel for them because it's just such a part of life to mess up.
Yeah.
And I think, too, I don't know. I mean, like one way in which I was thinking about this when Marcy was talking about like class and billionaires and wealth, and how Emily grows up without a lot in rural Ohio, sort of by the Appalachian Mountains, and she sort of comes into wealth through her husband, and there's this. I don't know. Like, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I feel like maybe one way in which I empathized with her, or I hoped that the readers would empathize with her, is showing how she thinks about the money and the wealth, and how it's so like tempting and relaxing, and it's so nice to have wealth kind of take care of you.
Yeah.
But also there are ways in which it's constantly surprising. Like there's a moment when she hears her friend talking about driving to the Hamptons and getting stuck in traffic, and how she calls a helicopter to bring her home. And this is based on a true story that a friend of mine who is a private chef for someone wealthy in the Hamptons told me. And when she told the story about calling the helicopter, or when he told me the story about how somebody called a helicopter, I said, well, what did she do with her car? Did she just like leave it by the side of the road? And he was like, oh, Marie, the driver took it home. She wasn't driving the car herself. And I built that into the book, and Emily kind of has the same experience of like being unfamiliar with this world that she's kind of stepped into. And I feel like anybody can empathize with feeling like a stranger in a new situation.
Well, I mean, that's kind of one of the wonderful similarities between your three books is you each have someone who is a bit of a fish out of water. You know, Joni is the poor girl next door that's suddenly among these billionaires, and Isabella is the ingenue kind of in this food world.
Yeah, maybe.
So do you ever have a feeling, you know, you craft this character lovingly, and you have their backstory, and you know it's your job to bring them through these trials and tribulations to hopefully their ultimate success. And yet, as you're writing, there are certain moments where you know you're about to have to do something like pretty mean to them. Do you ever have that feeling when you're setting down to write the scene where they're going to be humiliated or make a devastating mistake, and feel either dread or glee heading into that day of writing?
I'm going to think about this. I'm going to pass it down.
I mean, not really. I think having some distance from the character, like, it is interesting. Have you ever seen the movie Stranger Than Fiction with Will Ferrell? Has anyone seen that movie? It's about, it's like a guy who starts hearing the voice of a narrator in his head, played by Emma Thompson, and he's like going through his life, and it's like, Frank so-and-so woke up this morning not knowing he was going to die today, and it's like, he hears that, and he was like, who is saying this? So it sort of feels that when you're writing, it's like, you do feel like God a little bit. You're like, wow, I'm going to do something terrible now. There's going to be, spoiler alert, there's going to be a fire, there's going to be, but at the same time, it's all to serve the purpose of taking your character on a journey, and even though this horrible thing might happen, it's like hopefully going to change them for the better or for the worse, but ideally for the better. So I think everything should have a purpose in the story. So even when you're going to do something cruel or horrible, that it's a turning point, or that it's going to do something to help your character. So I don't know if I have glee about it, but it is nice to know where you're headed. I think that helps.
I hear you justifying your actions.
Yeah.
And I thought of an answer, so that was good.
Yes.
And it was actually with another novel of mine, which is Hurricane Girl, which we also worked on. And sometimes I feel when I'm writing, when I know something big has to happen and I'm scared to write it, I avoid things. And so sometimes I have to go back and I have to rewrite and I have to rewrite and I have to make something happen for it. Like, because I get scared. And so with Hurricane Girl, there's a major act of revenge that happens. And you didn't even read the draft, Jenny. I wrote a whole draft where she doesn't do it. She doesn't even go back or yeah. And so I have to push myself sometimes, and I have to get to a place that I'm really afraid to write. And then and sometimes I used to work writing in a communal space, which I don't like to do. And people would say that they could see me smiling while I was typing, and I don't know. So yeah.
When you say that that you're afraid to write those scenes, scenes, is it because you're afraid of how you're going to feel when you're doing it, or is it that you don't think you're going to be able to do it right, and so you're procrastinating or dreading messing it up?
I think it's because I don't think I'm going to be able to do it right, or I don't know if I'm going to take it far enough, and I want to, but I'm just afraid that I'm not going to get it right. So I have to really push myself. In Hot Air, there's a scene where it's just a fight at a swimming pool, and really the climax of that scene, that was the scene I worked the hardest on in the whole book, is where the boss throws a bagel into a swimming pool. And it's actually pretty ugly, though it doesn't sound like it, but I had to work that over and over and over to get it to really.
That's right.
Yeah, that was the scene I worked the hardest on in the whole book. Yeah.
What do you think, Marie?
I don't want to say that I'm gleeful when I'm making my characters suffer, but people have told me that I make my characters suffer, and in several of my books. And I guess maybe some of it is because of what I like as a reader. I mean, I love reading romance, and I also I don't know if any of you love a romance, or if you know some of the tropes of romance fiction, but I always like the dark night of the soul, where it seems like everything is lost. Like the characters just are at their bottom, they feel like there's no hope, but then it's okay. So I guess I do like to make my characters suffer, but only so that they can be okay.
That you can save them.
Yeah, maybe that's right. Oh, am I not talking loudly enough? Is this better? Have people not heard me at all this entire time? Not as well. Thank you for letting me know. So sorry.
So because this is such an unusual panel, because you all share an editor, me, I thought we could actually pull back the curtain a little bit and talk about the editorial process and sort of, I don't know, some of the very professional battles that occur between editors and writers. And I come to this from a funny perspective because I've been an editor for 23 years and then I've been an author for 2, so really a big shift. But I discovered there were all these things that I used to say and believe about being an editor that I have a kind of different point of view on now. So one of them is I used to always tell writers that my editorial philosophy was that the editor was like your best friend who is going to take a look at you before you walk into the party and warn you that you have spinach in your teeth. Get the spinach out before you go into the party. And I felt like that was a great explanation of my job. And then I experienced being edited, and I love and worship my editor, but didn't always agree with all the comments. And now all of a sudden I think, but like, is there necessarily spinach there? Or are you just seeing spinach where there is no spinach? Or maybe I like spinach and like you don't like spinach, but it's become a lot more, there's a lot more gray area there. It is not an editor telling you what is wrong so you can fix it and then go out into the world. But what do you think of that theory in general? And then also, what would you give as advice to writers who, are working with an editor who's telling them they have spinach in their teeth and they're not really sure about that?
I mean, with Hot Air, one of the things that you asked me to do, it was so unspecific. You said you wanted a twist.
A twist.
That's
right.
It made me mad. I was like, I don't know how to write twists. I'm not going to write a twist. I was like, I'm going to do everything else you asked for, but I'm not going to write a twist. And you didn't even suggest it. And one day I kind of thought I was done, and I was walking down the stairs of my house, and I thought of a twist. And it was like one of those moments of writing. It's the only time I ever have it. I like ran upstairs and I wrote my twist, which was really only 3 sentences that made a whole other scene not happen as it was. And I wrote you a twist.
Yes.
And then I was grateful to you because you asked me for it. And I feel like a lot of working with an editor is having a silent fight that you never tell your editor about.
Yes.
And I also, because I do I don't teach, but I edit people's novels. I'm a developmental editor. And what I tell people is you're not supposed to agree with your editor all the time.
Yeah.
But you're never supposed to ignore them, because if they don't like something about your book and you just say, well, screw you, my book is perfect, I'm not going to do it, it's never going to work for you. You always have to think, well, why don't they like it? And how can I keep it my way, but make it my way so that your editor still likes it? And that's what I always try to do. I never want to ignore what my editor has to say. And my book was so much better because it had a twist. And Jenny also, by the way, has I've worked with her on 3 novels, which is so lucky. With Hurricane Girl, you really didn't give me.
No, I should have to give back my paycheck for that portion of my year, because Marcy, her last book, Hurricane Girl, she sent to me. I fixed like a typo.
Yeah.
I was like, Marcy, the book is perfect. Anything I ask you to do is going to mess it up. And Marcy was like, what? It was the weirdest thing.
Yeah, but so you can really trust it, like, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
so, yeah, I think, and people sometimes say that editors don't edit, and that's just profoundly not true, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I can't think of anything I really disagreed with you on. I mean, anything major in the book. Like, I think, like, I'm thinking about how Emily becomes a writer in the novel, and you get glimpses of the novel that she's working on. And Jenny at one point said, "We don't need as much of this.
Yeah.
Like, you should really cut as much as you can." And I think maybe I had like some resistance about it initially because I had enjoyed writing those book within a book parts a lot. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, Jenny's right. This is not about the book that Emily writes. It's about Emily's story. And so I did exactly what Jenny said. I don't know, Jenny, did you have a moment where, I don't know, like you agreed with something your editor said when you were writing Pineapple Street?
Yes, definitely. I think, my editor made it a million times better. But I think that there were also moments where I didn't know how to do what was being asked of me. And there was one joke that she killed 3 times. She just kept being like, "This isn't funny," and would send it back to me. And I was like, rude. And I'd try again. And she'd write, "Still not funny." I mean, I finally got it. And you know what? The joke that finally is in there is so much better than any of the previous ones. But it sure hurt my feelings. And obviously it's not about feelings. It still hurt my feelings. What about you, Adam?
Well, I mean, Jenny to me was like Obi-Wan Kenobi. Like, I felt like she was just sort of kind of came in like a wizard. And because I didn't find like you had that many edits. I just felt, but what was so cool is, my main character at the end of the book does something that's not very nice, or is going to do something that's not very nice. And Jenny was like, "We need to protect your main character to keep her likable." And I was like, that hadn't really even occurred to me that was important that the audience stay on her side. But because in my mind, I was like, well, she maybe would do this. And so Jenny and I, when we first met, we went to lunch. And I'll never forget, you gave me like 3 pieces of notepaper. You're like, "So here's what I think should happen." And it was like a roadmap. It was like, if you move this scene here and you move this scene here and you have this person say this and da-da-da, it will work. And I remember getting that. I was like, whoa. And I went home. And I actually at first didn't even get how those things were going to help. And so I actually did those changes before really fully understanding the changes. And then when I read it back, I was like, oh, this really does work. I didn't quite understand what you were seeing that I wasn't seeing, but it was more about the unfolding of information and how things played out, and sort of to make sure the audience was going along for the journey each step of the way. And then in terms of advice for writers about how to take feedback from your editor, it was funny. I went to graduate school for playwriting at NYU, and we had this teacher named Gary Garrison, and he had a class called Drama Lab where we'd all write little plays, and then he'd call us up on stage in front of everybody and then sort of read us to filth and be like, "That scene you wrote had no conflict." And so half the people would fight back, be like, "That's not true, Gary. My scene had," and half the people would be like, "Oh my God, he's right. My scene had no conflict." And I realized there are 2 kinds of people who get feedback. One are sponges, and I was like a sponge, and it was just be anything he said was I'm taking this all in. My scene is terrible. And then there were people that were like walls where it would just bounce right off them. Like, "No, that's not true. You're not right." And I realized the right way to be is to almost be like coral.
Nice.
Where you take in the particles, you process them, take what you need out of it, and then expunge what you don't. And I think that's, to me, the best way to experience being edited is take what's useful, process it, think about it, and then it's not. And to your point about spinach in the teeth, it's ultimately all well-meaning. No editor is out to get you or try to hurt you. It's all. It's just you have to keep in mind what your vision for the thing was, and does that accord with what this editor is saying? And usually it does.
Well, so one of the more sort of famous phrases that people use when talking about the editorial process is "kill your darlings," so cutting pieces you love. And I think we're sort of supposed to look at "kill your darlings" like stiff upper lip writer. Don't be so precious. Be willing to break something for the overall strength of it. But it is sort of more complicated than that, right? Because sometimes your darling can be, okay, maybe on the page it's not delivering exactly what, it's supposed to, but it was very formative to the way you thought of the book, and you can't. Anyway, are there times where you think "Kill Your Darlings" just doesn't resonate, or times you felt like and not with me, you've all been edited by other people too. Are there times where you felt like you were supposed to kill something and you just didn't want to kill it or couldn't kill it, or did and regretted it?
I mean, I guess because I have 6 books, I definitely have experience where I've absolutely not done, and it wasn't working with you what an editor wanted, because I knew it was so important. And sometimes, I mean, in the end, and I think every editor will say this, it's your book. Like, they just really want to help you make it better.
Yes.
But it is your book, and if I had done what that editor had suggested, it wouldn't have been my book anymore. And I think "Kill Your Daughters" is like a kill your daughter. It's helpful, but I don't believe it to be true. Like, sometimes I think your darlings are your darlings because they're really good. Like, I've never loved that phrase.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it almost implies that you're supposed to kill it because you love it.
Yeah.
Like that the very act of liking it means that there's something wrong with it. And that's
Yes.
self-punishing.
Yeah.
Yeah, with my first book, I wrote a book of essays almost 20 years ago called The Amateur Gourmet, which was about learning how to cook. And there are all these chapters about using a knife and going to the farmer's market and how to go to a restaurant. And I had this one chapter called Cooking for Your Family. And that was the chapter that was dearest to me, because it was about my parents and how they didn't cook and how they wouldn't get me an easy bake oven when I was growing up and how mad I was about that. And so it's very personal and all about their history and stuff. And so I turned in the book, and the editor was like, "I love your book, but the only chapter that doesn't work is the one about your family." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And then he was like, "It doesn't give the reader what they want. It's they want to learn how to cook. And you're going off on all these tangents about your family's history." And so it was the first time I was where it was killing my darlings, because I was so proud of it and I thought it was such good writing, but I also had to see the larger vision, which is we're selling this book as a guidebook in a way, and so you're not giving the reader what they came to expect when they bought the book. So I think it's about you can kill your darlings if you understand the reason why you're drowning your baby in the bathtub.
And I also think that, there are scenes in every book that maybe end up on the cutting room floor, but you needed to write them as the writer because it was instructive for you. You learned something about your character. It set something up. So I think it is the worst feeling in the world to throw out writing. You're like, oh my gosh, that's a week of my life. That's all this intellectual brain power I poured into something, and now I'm throwing it away. But if you can reframe that as, I was learning something while I was doing that, and that's not going to show. But throwing stuff out is hard.
I do have a little psychological trick for any writers out there, which is when I'm told to cut something that I feel really reluctant to cut, I will excise it and I'll save it in another document.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really feel like it's totally lost. And the truth is that then I forget about it. If I can't remember anything that I saved like that, but it doesn't make me feel like it's totally gone.
Well, I've gone on the writing side. I went too brutal and cut, stuff, and then had my editor come back and be like, "Hey, I missed that little thing about that," and thank God I had it saved somewhere else. And I was like, "Oh, okay, we'll just slot that back in." But yeah, it's possible to overly kill the darling.
Can I ask you, when you're editing, do you feel guilty when you're telling someone to kill their darling? What is it? Oh, yeah.
And you know what? The thing that I actually feel that makes me feel guiltiest of all is when I lead an author down the wrong direction and I waste their time and energy, and it stinks, but it happens, because I will really feel like, gosh, if they just write this one scene, that's going to be the linchpin and it's going to unlock some stuff. And they'll try and they'll come back and they'll give me something and I'll go, My bad. No. You know, and I'm like, I feel awful about it. You know?
Right.
Because I understand it's like, in some ways, it does sometimes feel like a writer has a finite number of productive, creative hours every day, week, month, year, whatever. And I'm never gonna take that for granted, you know. So sending somebody on a wild goose chase makes I feel like very bad about that.
Interesting.
So there was, when I was a younger editor, there was this hugely established, successful editor that I worked with, and when we were reviewing manuscripts to potentially acquire, you know, we would buy stuff that wasn't perfect, but you know, you needed it to be in pretty good shape. And the piece of advice that she gave me, editor to editor, was you can fix plot, but you cannot fix the writing, and you cannot fix character. What do you think of that editorial philosophy from the point of view of an author?
It makes sense. Yeah. I mean, writing like words. You know, I thought you were gonna say like style. Like I thought you were gonna say like voice, or you know that you can't fix that because I guess that falls under the umbrella of writing.
There's a little difference, but yes.
But because plot, yeah, absolutely. Like you can move this thing here and move that thing there, and that can change the thing. But if somebody doesn't have a good like a voice that pulls you along, or you know, brings you on the journey, it's almost like pointless. You could have the best plot in the world, but people won't want to go along for the ride. So I think that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I had an experience with Hot Air where I had an overzealous copy editor, and she was really like fixing all of these sentences. Like I'd already worked with Jenny and and she just changed all of this. And sometimes I just lost confidence, and I was like, oh, she's a copy editor, and I made things wrong. And you got my version. You're like, Marcy, I'm so sorry. And we put it all back, and it made me feel so good. And it was a hard experience. Changing my book when I felt like I shouldn't do it. So I think writers can be really vulnerable, and so
Yes,
yeah.
that was really a wild experience. I haven't had very many moments like that where, you know, Marcy has an extremely distinctive writing style, and the copy editor didn't get it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, in general, the copy editor is supposed to be very light, supposed to be fixing grammar, punctuation, continuity, those kinds of things. And instead, really took it upon themselves to rewrite. And it was kind of shocking when that
And I
happened.
should have reached out sooner. Sometimes I forget. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but on the other hand, because you're like, your expectation is that they are fixing mistakes.
Yeah.
We're expecting them to see spinach, you
Yeah,
know,
right,
like that is
yeah.
real spinach. But it turns out maybe not always.
And that's the hard part too, is just always trusting yourself. It's really hard. It's really hard to disagree with a copy editor that wants to take out your hyphens or and also when an editor really doesn't want a point of your book and you want it, which has happened, it's hard to hold your guns, which
Yeah.
I think is really important.
Yeah.
Not all the time, because it's the coral reef, you know, if you yeah.
My God, yeah.
Yeah, you know, when you told us that philosophy, I found myself really agreeing with it. And then over the past couple of minutes, I thought, but do I agree with it? And I guess because I was thinking about how there's this interconnection between plot and character, in the sense that the plot happens the way that it does because of what the character wants and doesn't want, and how they react to things. And so if you're changing the plot, you're kind of going to inevitably change the character. Like I was thinking about how in Crazy Rich Asians, so much hinges on the fact that the main character, who is just kind of a normal girl who falls in love with an extremely wealthy man, but she doesn't know that he's so wealthy. And then his mother really objects to their relationship. The main character goes to the mother and it basically says, I'll give him up. I'm going to give him up because I don't, want anything to come between you and him. And I feel like if that had changed, that would have meant something so different for the character.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, like if instead she said, I'm going to fight for him no matter what, like that would have been very different. That would have been changing the plot, but also changing the character.
Yes. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we are going to open it up to audience questions, which is a shame because I really have like so many more things I wanted to talk about. But all right, I'll grill you guys later over drinks.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, how many cooks is too many cooks in the kitchen editorially, because so we as editors would love to pretend that we were like the only voice that writers listen to. Obviously, that's not true. The agents play a huge role in giving input, and then most of my writers do have a few trusted writers, whether it is, you know, their partner or another writer that they trust and admire. I had an experience recently that was pretty nuts. So I bought this book, and it was a really hot auction. So there were about 15 different editors who all were bidding on this manuscript. And when it gets that competitive, they schedule Zooms so that the author gets to meet with all the editors. And the editors want to differentiate themselves and sound smart and give, you know, notes and feedback. So this writer, we had a great call, and then she had like 15 calls with other people telling her what was wrong with her book. And then it went on to be sold for film. So she had another dozen calls with people telling her how they would change her book. So by the time it came to editorial, I gave her my editorial notes. She had all of these voices in her head. She went away, and her first rewrite was a mess. And it was because she was hearing so many conflicting pieces, and she had, I think she came back and said, "Oh my God, I'm just so embarrassed. I turned in something so bad for you to read it first." And I was like, 15 people wanted to buy it. Like, what? It's not bad at all. We ended up righting the ship. Everything worked out the way it should have. But I thought to myself, well, that was too many cooks in the kitchen. That was the devastating, far extreme end of what happens when there are too many people telling you what to do with your book. Can you each tell us how many people you like to have read your book? What is your ideal cook in the kitchen number?
Well, since I wrote a food book, I'll do the cook in the kitchen question.
Yes.
The first person who read my book was my partner, Craig. And it was so funny because there's a gay character in the book who's like the gay best friend, and he's kind of sassy and a little mean, and Craig hated him. He was like, I hated that character. He was awful. And I was like, well, you don't have to be friends with him. It's like he's there for a reason, like, you know. And so what I looked for, and I had two other friends read it who had no issues with that. They had their own issues. So what I looked for was consensus, like what's the consensus amongst everybody. And then my agent read it, and the original title of the book was Ghost Bitten, like ghost written, ghost bitten. And she's like, and when she read the book, she's like, I love the book. She's like, I hate the title. You have to change the title. She's like, it sounds like a YA vampire book. So we came up with Food Person over, you know, that was like a long period. So I feel like very selectively, like there was input, but no, I had nothing like what your author had, where it's like so many voices. That would be hard. I do think like, I'm 46, and I think it took me this long to write my first novel, because along the way in my 30s and 40s, I was like a sponge, and like anything I wrote, I would let people read, and I'd be like, oh, they're right, oh, they're right, and they're right, oh, I should change this, I should change, and I would just end up having no sense of what I wanted anymore, or what. And I think the most important thing is like holding on to yourself in a weird way, like to trust your own vision and to hold on to that tight, because it's so easy to let it go and be like, oh, maybe I'm wrong about all this. And so I think that's been really helpful to be able to figure that out eventually. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, actually, Marcy and I had breakfast this morning, and I told her about an experience that I had writing Ordinary Love, which was that when the manuscript, I had half of the manuscript, I gave it to a friend who's another writer, and a good friend, and somebody who I knew would tell me the truth, which is why I handed it to her. Because I had this, normally I know whether I think a book is good, and in this case, I felt like, I don't know, like, is this the right thing? And I gave it to her, and she said, this doesn't work. This is not one book. This is two books squished together. Either write a divorce story or write a love story. They don't belong together. And I hung up the phone and I cried. Oh. I thought, oh my God, like I can't write what she wants me to write. Like I can't split this into two books. I don't want to, and I cannot. And then I, later that day, got a call from my agent who said, I love it, keep writing. And so I was like, I'll listen to her. Yeah. But I guess like that, maybe the question is, or I don't know how to answer your question, I guess, but I'm going to turn it into something else, which is to say maybe it's not how many cooks are in the kitchen, but do you trust the cooks? Or do those cooks want the same thing that you do? It's not that my friend is a bad friend or a bad writer. She's a good friend and a good writer, but she wanted something different than what I wanted. So she just wasn't the right cook for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I love to read acknowledgments. Sometimes when I buy a book, it's the first thing I'll read, and you'll see books where they have so many readers. You'll have like listen,
Yeah.
and I don't even know. I'm so protective at this point. I'm so protective of my work, and I basically have one friend, and I let her read my first drafts, and she's useless. But all she does is she says I love it, and it's meaningless because all she says is I love it. But it just makes me feel so good, and when Shelley loves my work, then it goes to my agent, and so when he doesn't like something, then I kind of trust him because we've been working together for so long. And then lately, then Jenny gets it. So it's really 3 people. And the first one doesn't do anything.
So honest. I love it.
Okay, but you have to be really careful. I had a bad experience long ago where I had a partner read a draft of my book and they didn't like it. And that relationship really couldn't sustain it. Like, I feel like writers in couples, it's like a dangerous thing and you might want to avoid it. Anyhow, that was bonus. You didn't ask for that. Yeah.
All right, we have a few minutes left. Do we have any questions for the writers up here? Yes.
I have a question for you.
Oh,
Are you going to do a second book?
I am. I have another book coming out next June. It's called The Shampoo Effect.
I'll look for it.
Thank you.
And obviously other people will.
Oh, good. I'll come back. Yes.
So how do you keep all of your character backstories separate and then mix them together?
I mean, for me, I just sort of put them in where they need to be. You know, it's sort of like, what's missing here? Like for me, when I wrote my first draft of my novel, the celebrity didn't like food, but I was like, what's missing? And so I really focused on her the backstory of my main character had come very naturally. It was like, oh, she has a mother who lives on the Upper West Side and like takes Campbell's soup and like makes disgusting meals of like clam chowder mixed with chili, and she calls it surf and turf. So I was like, I got that covered. I need to work on this other character's backstory. And in a weird way, that unlocked a lot of the book because I realized that my celebrity character's mother was a cook who had a bunch of recipes that she had in a binder, and that helps to tell the story. So I think it's they don't get mixed up. It's more just like where do you need? It's like a stethoscope. It's like you're putting it against the book and you're sort of listening to it and be like, okay, where do I need more story? Where do I need more context? If that answers your question.
You have such great metaphors about
thank
writing.
you.
I love this thing
Thanks.
about the stethoscope. That's so cool. It's so cool that I forgot even what I was going to say about backstory. Except that, well, I mean, one piece of backstory that's really important in my novel is that Jen, who's the love interest, the Olympic track athlete, that she's raised by her grandmother. And I felt like that was a really important part of her character. And then her grandmother was somebody who loved her wholeheartedly and was extremely proud of her, no matter what she did, even if she failed. And that is something that Emily, the main character, does not have. And so I think it could be really interesting when you write a novel where your main character experiences a kind of lack that she sees that somebody else has, and then that can create a kind of tension or friction or just create some interesting kind of chemistry between the characters because their backstories have a difference.
And I would say that I don't know the backstories when I begin at all, and I don't outline, but so as I'm writing, I'm always figuring things out about the characters midway through. But once I figure it out, I don't just keep going. I'm like, oh, I figured this out. And then I'm always going back into the beginning of the book and layering things. And I feel like I do that. When I get to the end of a book, usually the last scene that I write sometimes just comes out right because I'm rewriting the beginning constantly as I figure things out. And that way I'm always remembering, because we do forget things about the backstories. And sometimes when you work on a book for a few years, you forget a part. So you always actually have to go keep rereading and keep remembering and tweaking as you go.
Yes, in the back.
stand up so you can hear me.
Okay.
So it sounds like you all write books about people who are different. And I especially was thinking about your gay best friend. So how do you put representation into your novel without, like, avoiding tokenism and trying to fully flesh out a character? Like,
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I feel like I had license to do it because I'm gay, so it's like I can make a horrible gay person. It's okay. But it's funny because I went to a panel. I was telling them last night where somebody asked me, what made you think you could write a book about a woman? And I was like, I don't know. I like women are great. It's like I guess I don't worry about it too much. It's just sort of I tell the story that I feel like I need to tell and just trust that people will go along with it. But yeah, do you guys deal with that in your books, tokenism?
Well, I guess, so I would say the first thing that comes to mind when you ask that question is where I'm thinking about Jen's found family. Jen has this group of friends that Emily really envies because Emily, even though she's queer, has lived a straight life, has had mostly straight friends. And then there's a scene in the book where she meets Jen and encounters all of these queer people, and even though they have queerness in common, they're different from each other. They're different racially, they're different in terms of their background, and different in terms of what they do in life. Like one person's a poker player, and some of them are track athletes, one is a ballet dancer. And I guess, I don't know, I would say that as someone who's queer myself, like this notion of found family is really important, and I think is maybe it was important to me to represent how people who can be very different can still have so much in common. And I think that that's true no matter what we're talking about, that there are points of connection between people who come from very different walks of life.
And I think there's just so much, not like luck, but there's just happenstance and chance to writing. And so if I want to write a character who's this, or if I want to write a character who's that, you just do it. And I think if you try really hard to create a specific thing so you don't offend readers, I think if you're trying too hard. So I tend not to worry. And I have written characters who aren't myself, and it's just great to imagine being something else. And I don't know, I once heard about dreams, that everybody in your dream is always you, even if it's like a mother or father. Maybe that's a little bit in fiction too. I don't know.
I'll jump in and add one more thing, which is that, and I see we're not going to have a ton more time, but that I've relied myself on authenticity readers for my work, because when I've written outside my lived experience, twice now I've paid a reader to give me some feedback, because one of my characters was Korean American, and this Korean American reader had some really good input on, the family dynamic wouldn't work like that. It would just be so unusual for this part to be as casual as it is. This would be a more anyway, I found it extremely useful. And so I think, asking for help when I'm potentially out of my depth has made me feel like I've gotten a better book out of that. All right. Yes.
Sorry, go ahead. I was wondering how your producer thinking about audience empathy and how that might involve myself, right?
I don't know. Everyone's looking at me, so I feel like I'm supposed to answer, even though I don't. I guess, what did I think of in terms of an audience? Well, even though my book is not a retelling of Persuasion by Jane Austen, it still was inspired by Jane Austen's book and about the way in which Anne Elliot, the main character, experiences regret and gets a second chance at a lost love. And so I was just kind of thinking about, well, why do people love Persuasion? What is it about Persuasion that really has inspired people for hundreds of years? And I guess I wanted the same kind of audience as that, like someone who really loved a juicy love story full of like angst and complication and like all sorts of other things too, like how we deal with being a mother and being a friend. And so I guess I hoped that my audience would be that. That's somebody who wanted the same things I wanted from the book.
I mean, I was going to say, just for me, like my audience I was a food blogger for 20 years, so most of my my readers would skip to recipe. They would just skip past everything I wrote. So I feel like I had to justify in the novel. I was like, hey, you guys are going to have to read every word to get this. So it's like I had that in mind when I was writing it. Yeah.
Did you have any thoughts on it?
I just feel like sometimes people are like, sit down, they're like, want to write a bestseller. And I just feel like you never know what's going to hit and what's going to be working at the time and what someone else is going to be writing about the time. And I actually really believe the audience when I'm writing is I really am always just trying to please myself.
Yeah.
And if I'm unhappy with the work, it doesn't work. And then that's such a small audience of one that I'm just so grateful that other people read my books and like them. It's just like tremendously wonderful. Yeah.
I have two specific friends that I think of when I'm writing, and I'm just always trying to make my friend Alexa laugh.
Yeah.
And that's just like, she would think that is so weird that I'm doing that. But anyway, that's like what works for me.
Yeah.
I think we have literally 1 minute. So if anyone has like a super fast question, we can do it. All right. Well, we all have an extra minute to enjoy our day.
Thank you.
Okay.
We'll come out. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.